Alright guys, welcome to episode 51. How do I find the percent of a number? So I'm going to give you guys an example of a problem and we're going to find out what percent is that number. Alright, so before we get started, I also added on here, this is going to be on IXL AA15, so when we're working on this in class, you're going to want to refer to these notes. So the question is, what is 35% of $60? Alright, so I'm going to give you guys three different strategies to solve this question. You're either going to draw a table, a percent bar, or a proportion. So if you have colors at home, go ahead and kind of underline 3. So I'm going to show you how to do it with the table, how to draw it with a percent bar, and how to work it out using a proportion. And you get to pick which strategy you think is easier for you in answering this question. The very first question you want to answer for yourself is you always want to find 10% first. We talked about this in class today with my little purple candy bar. So in this problem, the purple candy bar costs $60, and you always want to find 10%. How much would one piece of the candy bar cost if the whole thing was $60? And the way you always solve this is to divide the total by 10. So if the total is $60, 60 divided by 10 is 6. All right, so now we're going to write down this answer and set this answer up in a table and in a percent bar. All right, so what I want you guys to do is kind of go down to, skip a few lines down to near the bottom of your page, or maybe about middle of your page, and we're going to draw a table. So in this question, we're talking about percent, and we're talking about money. And I'm going to underline this green because this is my table strategy. Okay, and we're going to set up our table. Okay, so when you're making your ratio table, it doesn't matter if you put the dollars on the left side or the percent on the right side. You can kind of swap those, but you got to be sure if you put dollars on this side, you can only write about dollars on this side. So what I know about the problem is I know that $60 is 100%, and the question wants me to find 35%. So the first thing I want to do, though, is always find 10% first. So I'm going to find 10% first. I'm going to skip a few lines and put 10% right there. And the way that I find 10% first is to divide by 10. So I'm going to do 60. So let me draw the arrow and show why I do that. 100 divided by 10 is 10. So what I want to do is $60 divided by 10. And that's going to equal $6. So 10% is $6. Okay, so my question was asking me to find 35%. So if 10%, if one little block, let me find, one little block is $6, how much would 2 blocks be worth? So 20% is going to be worth $12 because it's 6 plus 6. So 20% is going to be $12. How much would 30% be? So that means I have 3 blocks, and each block is $6. So 6, 12, 18. So 3 blocks are going to be $18 for 30%. But the question wanted me to find 35%. So if I keep on going, 10, 20, 30, 40%, 6, 12, 18. If I have one more here, that would be $24. So my answer for 35% is going to be somewhere in the middle of 18 and 24. So how do I find out that 5%? So let me give you the strategy to find out 5%. We talked about it a little bit in class. So we know that one of these blocks is worth $6. What if I cut this block in half? If I cut 10% in half, I'm going to have 5%. So if I cut $6 in half, I'm going to have $3. And when I say cut in half, what I mean is you divide by 2. So to find 5%, I divide 10% by 2. And that'll tell me what the 5% is. So for the 35%, I know that 30% is $18. 35% is going to be 18 plus 3. Because 30 plus 5 equals 35. 18 plus 3 equals $21. So my answer for 35% is going to be $21. There's actually one more helpful strategy that you could use, and that would be to find 1%. So if I have 1%, what's my connection here from the 10%? If I know that 10% is $6, my relationship from 10% to 1% is to divide by 10, because 10 divided by 10 is 1. So if I were to divide this, sorry, there's a lot of arrows on the screen now. $6 divided by 10 would be 60 cents. So 1%, if I had one tiny block that was worth 60 cents and I had 35 of those, another way to find my answer would have been to multiply 60 cents times 35, and I would have got my answer $21. So I want you guys to go ahead and write that in your notes. Put this back in here. that to find 5%, you want to divide 10% by 2. You want to cut it in half. And to find 1%, you want to divide 10% by 10. We won't be using the 1% very often in 6th grade math, but it's a good thing to know. It's a good way to know how to find it. Okay, now we're going to draw the percent bar strategy. So those of you who like using the percent bar today in class, it's really the exact same thing as the table. 100%, the total is $60. Half of that, so half of $60 would be $30. If I wanted to find 10%, I would divide 60 divided by 10 and I would get 6. And then I would skip count. So 20% would be 12, 30% would be 18, 40% would be 24, and you would skip count all the way to whatever number that you needed to find. All right, and my very last strategy would be to use a proportion. So what I know is that I know in the problem that 35%, I know 35%, and I'm trying to figure out how much money is 35%. I'm going to put a question mark here. And I know that 100%, the total was $60. So what you want to look for in a proportion is there a number that you can multiply? 35 times what is 100? Is there a number that you know in your head? If you don't see that connection, then you say, is there a number that I can multiply 60 times something equals 100? So you're looking for those relationships. Now, this is a problem that would not be very good to use a proportion because it's not very obvious. I don't know what 35 times what equals 100, but the way I would find out is to use a calculator. So the fastest way to solve a problem like this would be to use a calculator and divide. So I would figure out 100 divided by 35 equals, a really ugly decimal, 2.8. So this means I'm going to multiply. So this means if I have a calculator, that means that what I can do is I can divide 60 divided by 2.8, and that would give me my answer of $21. Okay, so that strategy works really well if you have a calculator because you're going to have some really ugly numbers if you end up dividing it. To find this connection, I would divide 100 divided by 60, and that answer is 1.6. So what that says is that 21 times 1.6 equals 35%. So this is another strategy that you could use to find your answer using a calculator, or if the numbers are really nice. If the numbers are really easy and you can multiply it without any decimals, then that's a good strategy as well. So I wanted to show you 3 different ways to solve these problems, is to use a percent bar, a ratio table, and a proportion. I know these were long notes. I hope you guys copied them very well. We're going to be using them all week, and I will see you guys in class.